Welcome. Although I think let's go properly now. Hello and welcome to the Royal Rumble, where we bring together the best minds in Australian rugby podcasting to chat through the highs and the lows of the game that they play in heaven. My name is Ando. I'm from the Pick and Drive rugby team, 1/3 of that glorious gang, and it is my pleasure to be your host for the evening. Tonight, for our Christmas edition of the Rumble, we'll be doing things a little bit differently as our Christmas gift to you. The show is going to be broken up. It's going to go for an hour in length, and it'll be broken up into 10-minute chunks, each with a different host, each with a different topic, and each with an opportunity for you to get involved and give us your questions, comments, and banter throughout the show. So before we dive into things, who are you going to see? Who really is going to be gracing your screens this evening? Well, obviously, you're going to have my co-host, Mitch, from Pick and Drive Rugby. You're going to have my other co-host, Mitch, or Rev, from Pick and Drive Rugby and also the Rugby Fixation. And you'll have Matt from Gold Digger Rugby and Nelson from, actually, I need to say Nelson, the more attractive Dale. We got the better of the two Dales here, from Draft Rugby Podcast. So, gentlemen, without any further delays, let's add you into this show and get things started. Nelson and Rev, welcome to the ring. Nelson, let's make you front and center, mate. Make sure to unmute yourselves, boys, and let's go.
Good to be here, boys. This is a big moment for rugby in Australia, so let's get right into it, I think. So the first section that we're going to be going through is our build or our road to the Rugby World Cup. I think I'm going to ask you boys a couple of questions, get your opinion on this. I think the first big thing for me is when we talk about a Rugby World Cup and we talk about a winning side, the spine of a rugby side is a real key part of that. That's your hooker, your number 8, your number 9, your fly half, and your fullback. They basically control everything around the paddock from set piece to getting the ball out wide. So my first question I'll throw over to you, Rev. What do you think? I mean, we've got a few question marks there, especially around hooker, maybe 10 and 15. Do you think we pick and stick in 2022? Do we blood a few new players in those roles, or how do you think we work this in 2022?
I think we do need a bit of pick and stick. That hooker jersey hasn't been taken by anyone. I think this is the best chance to get Fainga, Yelesi, Marfi, Parecki, and Kaitu'u all starting a full season for their clubs. Whoever's the best of them, chuck them in there because we've got just less than 20 test caps available before the World Cup. We don't have many experienced options. I think Fainga's got 25 and he's the most experienced. Other than that, I love Valentini at 8. I love Harry Wilson at 8. So we're set there. Nick White, Tate McDermott, Jake Gordon sorted for 9. 10 and 12, I might let Ando cover, but I'm happy with some of the options. But 15, we've got to nail.
For me, I'll just jump in here. I think the 10 jersey has basically got to be going between a triumvirate of if Quade Cooper can maybe be a bit more consistently available for the Wallabies, and he is definitely in contention based upon his performances this year. James O'Connor's up there too, and you've got to be keeping Noah Lolesiu and probably Will Harrison in the picture too. I think of the rest of the 10s, Will Harrison is your man if he gets an uninterrupted season at the Waratahs at 10. And with Ben Donaldson there, it's going to be a little bit challenging to see whether or not he gets the full season in that 10 position.
Yeah, I think the 10's a big one for me. I mean, we saw shades of Quade, old school Quade, with his kicking and a few things that were pretty pivotal. But, we also saw the bad side of Quade back in the day, I think, against Japan. Overplayed his hand a little bit compared to, his first few games for the Wallabies. He was quite settled and something that I think, the Wallabies really built off very well. Who was your choice for fullback, would you say, Rev?
Look, for me at the moment, I think Reece Hodge. I think he's probably the safest. He's very experienced. He's got a good kicking game. And it's not a choice that fills me with a whole heap of excitement, but I think it's probably the choice at the moment that gives me the most comfortability based on the rest of our backline. But I'm very keen to see Jordan Petaia at 15 for the Reds this year. I think that's the biggest bright spark and the biggest room for potential there.
He's got a lot of competition, but yeah, hopefully he gets a crack there and, hopefully he can stay uninjured as well. I think we'll jump straight into the comments. Luke Taylor has thrown out this saying, Will Harrison just needs a good forward pack to show his potential. Could be the future. I honestly think if he was in that Brumby squad and playing with those boys, he would already have the Wallaby caps. So I think that's a pretty clear point in for me. I think he's got a big future ahead of him. My second question here, boys. So, I mean, we had 50% win rate in 2021, 7 from 14 matches. Our next series is against England, who have lost 8 on the trot since our win against them to knock them out, which was very sweet, in the Rugby World Cup, Home Rugby World Cup in 2015. And that included a clean sweep on Australian shores by England in 2016. What do we think, Ando? What do you think is the benchmark? What should we be aiming for?
You have to be aiming for a home win against a travelling England side to be basically 18 months out from the Rugby World Cup. There is nothing less than a win that is acceptable. The challenge is England are up there as one of the best teams in the world at this current point in the development cycle. They have an incredible squad filled with really top of the line players, even if they didn't get represented in the World 15 for 2021. They have an awesome competition over in England with the Premiership. I'm just really worried that it could be a 3-0 loss, but at the very least, we need to have that consistency in performance and consistency in execution of a game plan, and the "in Rennie we trust" mantra of the team is progressing and moving forward. Now, I'm hoping for a 2-1 win. Actually, no, you know what? I'm hoping for a 3-0 win, but I'll take a 2-1 win.
Yeah, look, Sheevy's just pointed out, our spring tour, we had a lot of injuries, which really didn't give us the shot that I think we probably thought and expected we have. We wanted 2 wins, I think, from this spring tour. At least we walked away with 0. But for me, it wasn't a loss of a tour because we did just do some of the things you were talking about, showed some potential, showed some growth. So it's hard to put a figure on it. I know I'll be disappointed if we don't get at least 1. I'll be positive if we get 2. If we get 3, I think I feel like I won the lottery. So it'll be interesting to see how we go into next year. How about for you, Rev? What do you think the key work-ons off the back of 2021 that the Wallabies really, truly need to work on?
I still think discipline in key areas is going to be our big focus. Defense, I thought we did really well to work on our one-on-one defense, but we ended up conceding more points on average this year than last year, and the most part was because we were giving more teams kickable penalties. We saw in the games overseas, I think England racked up 5 or 6 penalties against us in that match. Like, it really didn't give us much room to play if they could keep putting on that scoreboard pressure. So, for me, I'd really just like to see us hone in on those decisions. Maybe it makes it a bit easier with the Southern Hemisphere ref. I know that our ruck work wasn't up to the standard of Northern Hemisphere refs while over there, but we've got to adapt. And for me, that's easiest done with our own discipline, looking at tackle height, ruck entries, and just sort of getting that sorted.
Yeah, look, it all seems like fixable things for me. It's difficult, and you just look at all the Southern Hemisphere teams playing in the Northern Hemisphere. That penalty rate, the yellow cards, the red cards, really were all towards the Southern Hemisphere. So it is that difference in refereeing. But if we can't get that figured out come the World Cup, then it's going to be something that could end up losing you a chance at a Rugby World Cup. Ando, do you have anything you think we need to work on outside of that?
Oh, look, I think we just need to continue giving Paisami an opportunity to develop in that 12 position. I think he needs to be playing there for the full season for the Reds, because Len Ikitau is your nailed on 13 for the next 2 years for the Wallabies if he remains injury-free. So the question is, who's going to be inside of him? You want to have probably the fight between Paisami and Samu Kerevi. And so with those two, obviously at this point in time, Kerevi is your go-to. Okay, yep. If he's available, he is the Wallabies 12. But we've seen and experienced that he's not always available, and it actually took Paisami a fairly long time to kind of settle back into the Wallabies squad when Kerevi left. And so I just want Paisami to get that consistency of selection at 12, much like we were talking about Will Harrison for 10 at the Waratahs. I'd love to see Paisami starting there for the Reds for the whole season, so he can work on those little nuances that he had been developing within his game, particularly kind of the wider passing, although no Wallaby should ever pass wide within a game because intercepts galore. But also just the quality of his short kicking game that we've seen on a few occasions, and I'd love that to continue to develop. So those are my thoughts on him.
Yeah, look, I've really loved his development over the last 12 months, 18 months. We saw him, pulling off those little kicks, little grubbers, chip over the top in Super Rugby. And I think this year he showed that can come off at international level. We saw him do it with, scoring Pattaya to score to finish the game with grubbers under the post. It's a pretty ballsy thing to pull that off in Super Rugby, and it's a massive thing to be confident enough to do it in the Wallabies arena. And I think the interesting thing is clearly Rennie is allowing him to do that. He's giving him a license to actually, take a shot and play how he wants to play his rugby, which is something that excites me, I think, moving forward. The players aren't getting boxed in to play a certain style. They're allowed to chance their arm, and that's a really exciting thing for me. I think another question for me would be, there's a lot of players that have been on the periphery for me. Parisi's obviously one, didn't really get his crack that we were hoping for due to injury this year. Rev, is there a single player that stands out for you that if you had your say, he'd be playing for the Wallabies in 2022?
For me, this is a tough bit, but for me, I think if I've got to nail it down to one, Alex Murphy. I have to choose between a Reds and a Waratahs player, so I'm going to lean Murphy. It could have been Parecki, but I think they're the most dynamic but also skillful of the hookers available that haven't been capped. I think they're probably more useful than perhaps two in the squad, maybe more, and with a full season and less competition for positions, maybe they get their chance this year. So for me, a whole host of options, but Murphy I'll list.
Murphy's a big one for me. I think hopefully his size doesn't prove to be a bit of an issue for him. Yeah. He's a little bit smaller than maybe you'd expect for a hooker at this level, but he's a really exciting player. I thought, Sheepy's picked it, what I thought you were going to say, and that's Harry Wilson. That's pretty surprising. But, I mean, Valentini's done such a good job at number 8 at the back of that scrum. So hopefully we see more of Harry Wilson. And I think personally, our best setup could see Valentini at 6 at some point as well. Yeah. Ando, who's that one player that you'd be bringing in?
For me, it's Siliasu Vunivalu. And obviously, if he's injury-free, that's the challenge for him at the moment. But he's the replacement for Marika Korombete on the left wing at 11. And then you have Kellaway and Wright fighting it out at 14. And the competition for places is fantastic, but you need that power winger that we really missed with Korombete not being available. So, yeah, that's my pick of just that power backline player that we really, really miss with Korombete's absence.
Yeah, again, another one that I think everyone's pretty excited. I put a poll up on Twitter, and I think pretty much everybody echoed what you just said. Everyone wants to see Vunivalu in that Wallabies jersey. I can already see it now, the crossfield kick, him just reaching over to score and win us a grand final of the 2023 Rugby World Cup. So I'm excited, boys. I think we've chewed the fat a fair bit here in my topic, and good to be able to pick both of your brains. And yeah, hopefully we're going to keep on building.
All right, team. We're going to move into the next segment now. So Nelson, you stay here. Rev, you and I are cut, and we'll bring the others in. Let's go.
Here we go, boys.
All right. Well, second segment for this evening, we're going to talk about the Giteau Law amendments for 2022. Now, this is a big one for the potential future of the Wallabies, and we just really, at the moment, we don't know what's going to be made, what decision RA is going to make, how it's going to influence next year, but also 2023. So let's dive in. I've got a few questions for both of you, and I'll start off with you, Matt. What's your ideal conditions for selection for any player to play for the Wallabies for 2022, or from 2022? Sorry. Oh, hold on.
You're on mute.
You're muted. There we go. We can hear you now.
Fair enough. Sorry, I thought I'd muted myself there. Look, my ideal conditions. I was trying to think about this, and I was sort of analysing. Like, I wrote a piece where I'm actually against the relaxing of the Giteau Law. I think it's served us well. I think it's also had its issues as well, in the way that it's had an effect on players who have been staying loyal. it's really hard because I think we've discussed this a number of times, and everyone acknowledges that the last 2 years have been anything but normal. So for it's almost like, can you focus on the last year or 2 years, or should you actually go back to 2015 when it was introduced and see how useful and efficient has it been? And it's largely brought in for World Cups, I think, my personal opinion. Karevi aside, I think the whole purpose is around, trying to prepare a team, the best possible team made up of the best possible players in the world for a World Cup. And if you were to sort of look at where we are now, I would like to see certainty, like before the next season. I had the benefit of interviewing Ollie Hoskins, who debuted just last month, and he said that at the end of the Wallaby tour, Rennie spoke to all the guys and said he doesn't still know what's the criteria is. So he obviously said to guys like him and Skelton, maybe not, I don't know yet. So it doesn't appear as of a few weeks ago the decision had been made by RA. What do I personally want? I would be more happy to keep it with the 60 cap threshold, but maybe you make an exception. Maybe the exception could be something like you could choose a player who's played less than 60 caps as long as they've played for the Wallabies in the last 2 seasons. So at least they're not, completely out of the system. That's one idea off the top of my head.
Yeah, exciting. Okay. And Nelson, what are your thoughts around your ideal conditions for the Ghetto Law from 2022 for the future?
I think I've got to just be a little bit calm on this. Like for me, I think in the last year or two, the excitement of someone like Karevi coming in, the excitement of, Skelton and Arnold and players getting their chance, I think it was a unique opportunity for us to do. And I think if we sit there and look at how it's going to affect rugby in Australia in a broader aspect, I don't think we can just open it up to anyone with an Australian passport around the world. So I think for me, you may be keeping that 60 caps, and maybe we do just look at having, 2-3 players, key players that can be brought in, like they sort of brought that tweak in last year and we didn't get the chance to use it with COVID. So, I mean, if it means we've got to bring in a lock, if it means we've got to bring in Quaid or something along those lines, we can fill those little holes, but it's not like everyone gets the confidence that they can go offshore and still just get picked whenever they feel like it. So I think, it's finding that balance.
I've got a term for my one. I think we'll call it the Coram Betty clause, because I think if there's one guy who we're going to lose in the next year who I'd like to see back in 2023, he's probably the first cab off the rank.
Yeah, definitely.
And that, as you both said, that's the tricky line of trying to figure out what's going to be best for on-field performance and get the wins, but also not damage the Super Rugby product in Australia and sort of diminish what we've currently got. So you've both said what you thought your ideal model would be. What do we now think that RA will actually bring in from next year? I'll go back to you first, Matt.
I think they tinkered, and I think we'll see something similar to what we've seen. So I don't think they'll completely ignore the fact that they have players that are clearly of interest to Rennie. I think it'll be some sort of formalization of players who have either got caps or haven't got caps but still qualify in a it will be complex. Let's face it, rugby policies and laws are never easy and never cut and dry. There'll probably be a few conditions, but I suspect it will be something along the lines of maintaining the 60 game, maybe bringing it down to 40, which then does catch someone like Coram Betty, who's at 42. But then, limiting the number of wildcards or exemptions, whatever the term would be, to 2 or 3. And then maybe on top of that, if there's a situation where there's a position it's almost like a sort of not a liability issue, but you know what I mean, a duty of care, as there was with sort of Ollie Hoskins coming in at tight head prop because they didn't have any other tight heads, then they can enact that. So I suspect it'll be something along those lines where it'll be 2 or 3 different ways, and it'll be clear once they say it. It just might be, one of those things as fans, we always got to kind of jump onto the Google to do a quick search when someone goes down to figure out what will happen next.
And Lincoln Adler writes in and says, let them pick a max of 5 players from offshore, not enough to bring disharmony. And that, I think, is what we've done this year. And I think it goes to show that it has worked. From looking at the performances of the Wallabies from where we were, Bledisloe Cup, first few rounds of Rugby Champs, to when we started to bring in that offshore talent, we were looking at much better results. Hugh Tyndall says, oh, yeah?
No, I was going to say on that disharmony, my question is given the fact we did choose Rory Arnold, Skelton, we brought in Sean McMahon, and guys like Matt Phillip, Harry Wilson didn't get much game time, have we created disharmony? Have we created another potential, what I would call a Matt Tamur situation where, Tamur basically had his position in 2015 taken over by the player that the law was named after?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to have an opinion on this. Look, I think it does come down to individual players, and these players know that this is about having the best Aussie side. And I think they can understand the circumstances at the moment and know that this was pretty fluid. So my guess is that Matt Phillip, as a good example, knew that these guys are very good locks. They're going to have their crack, and he just needs to be confident that he can, solidify himself when he gets those opportunities for the Wallabies. And I think he's done that, to be honest. So it definitely has the ability to create some disharmony. But I think if it's done in the right way, and when the players are together, when Rennie's talking to the boys, it's approached in the right fashion, I think it can be a positive, and it can actually be a positive for the culture as well. As long as everyone's striving to win and everyone's striving to have the best Wallaby side, I think players will understand in a way.
Going back a few questions, we were just talking about it before we jumped into that last one around disharmony. Looking at the results for 2021, those last few games, do we think bringing in that extra talent was a massive market improvement for the Wallabies from what we had seen previously, sort of 2020, early 2021, that France series? Matt, what are your thoughts around that?
It's funny. I mean, we didn't get to see much of Skelton, did we? And we barely saw McMahon. So it's hard to have an opinion on them. I think the best example, the two examples we have are probably Rory Arnold and Kurtley Beale. And okay, Bill did something magical in Wales, but for one move, but then the rest of it was always a bit of the old Beale. You knew he was going to maybe break through and do something special, but he was also possibly going to do something quite stupid. And Arnold just seemed to come in and solidify what I thought was a forward pack that had performed pretty well all season. So I've no doubt that I think that these guys bring something. I don't think they don't bring something. It's just a question of long term, is that going to work? And I suppose to answer your question, to respond to you, Nelson, I think you make a great point. If it's done in the fashion of, hey guys, we're 2 years out from a World Cup, we're trying things, we're trying to build, I suspect players are going to make they are going to, understand that. I think if it's done the year of the World Cup and all of a sudden you've been working a whole cycle thinking that you've got a good spot, you've got your selection sorted, and all of a sudden they parachute some guy who hasn't been playing for 4 or 5 years, then maybe that is going to put people offside. So, but yeah, I don't know. In terms of what they brought, I don't know. What did you think? Do you think that they were they added a boost?
I personally don't think we saw enough out of any of the players to really warrant bringing them back over players that we've currently got. Yeah. Kurtley Beale, questionable. Samu Kerevi, Quade Cooper definitely had more of an impact than any of the European-based players, and I think as a fan, we're all crying out to see more of them in the future. So I think if we can change rules to make them a little more allowed to be picked, then I think we're moving in the right direction. Yeah. Robski Foster says disharmony versus cohesion may make a big difference. I'll throw this last question to you, Nelson, before we do move on to the next topic. And that question is, do we think, regardless of whatever Rugby Australia go with for the Ghetto Law next year, whatever the hard rules or the laxed rules, do you think they change those for a World Cup year and throw the gates open and just pick whoever they can to win a World Cup? Look,
I think Matt just touched on probably what my opinion is on that. I think you've got to pick it and you've got to set it in stone. If you're trying to create a culture and an understanding that, we can bring a few players in and you're going to have to wear it on the chin on occasion, I don't think you can just change it every year, whatever sort of suits you. You know what I mean? I think we've got to pick it 2 years out. This is our chance to do it now. And we've got to take it easily through this World Cup see where we're at, 4-6 years down the track. Maybe we get through the next 2 Rugby World Cups, using this sort of system. It is an evolving sort of dynamic world rugby with a lot of players going overseas. So it is going to be fluid, but I can't just change year in, year out.
Yeah. Well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you, gentlemen, for both of your time on this topic. And it will be very interesting to see which way RA go. And hopefully we get a decision sooner rather than later. So for the next segment, we will have Matt, Rev, and Ando running things. So we'll take a break. Nelson, you and I.
Game on, Matt. Over to you, my friend.
God. Am I in control now of the ship? This is
boy, all yours.
Well, look, we're going to talk law changes and red cards, and I think if there's one subject that has managed to provoke the biggest reaction all year, it has to have been the cards. I go back to the start. It's almost like the season was bookended. We had Marika Korombeti's red card against France, and then in the last Welsh game there was the Valentini red card, and also I guess the Beale yellow card. But I'll ask you guys, maybe Rev, I'll ask you first. Let's discuss red cards to begin with. What's your biggest takeaway from some of the changes that were made? Because remember, we had a 20-minute trial. It was a trial, but that wasn't rolled out during the spring tour. What are your sort of big observations on what you've seen from the way the cards have been executed this year?
The big thing for me, I think, is consistency across red cards and just how many different ways there are to get red cards. I think the law book needs a massive work through and just get some of the best rugby brains, by which I just mean the two of you and Morgan Turanui, just get you guys in a room to go through and just look at, well, what's actually going to constitute dangerous play? Because I hate the idea of accidentally hitting someone high. And Morgan said it on Between Two Posts. Valentini's tackle in that last match where he got the red card, he did 9 out of 10 things perfectly, but it was just slightly too high, and that's off. And that's the same punishment as if he saw someone lying on the ground, punched him in the face, took his phone out, and started messaging his sister. So I don't think that there's any sort of there's no consistency in that decision making. I think there does need to be some nuance and some grey area where we can work that. 20-minute red cards is a great start. Going back to that Super Rugby, you did a great job of implementing those, and we saw a really different contest. I think that's all for the better. So if we're just talking red cards, that's an easy fix for Test Rugby, I think.
I suppose there are things that there've always been, ideas about introducing the third cards or a third card system. What are your thoughts, Ando, on the idea of perhaps having both your yellow and red cards and then introducing a third card like an orange card or a black card or something like that?
I think it definitely has to be a black card because it needs to be like the color of death. And if you do something that is incredibly against the spirit of the game, like you king hit a person, you eye gouge, you basically a Thomas Lavanini and do anything on a rugby field, then you are deserving to be off for the whole game. And I don't think the 20-minute return should apply in those types of circumstances. Because I think the great thing about a red card in rugby is that they are markers of what is unacceptable within the game. And there's a bit of a danger if we take the red card down to a 20-minute send-off and then the player can be replaced, is that serious intentional infractions or dirty plays, they're not punished as harshly as they should be. But then we also, it's solving one problem where Valentini's mistake of 1 out of 10 things incorrectly isn't as harshly punished, but then it could let something else really dirty go. And I think a black card would help solve that problem.
Yep. Yeah, look, it's fair enough. I there's a couple of comments there. I think at least Hughes made a great comment, which we should bring up about 20-minute cards reduces the impact of ref howlers. But yeah, it doesn't address the underlying issue of consistency and fairness. Now, that was your point, Rev. Let me ask you both, and you can both answer this. Australia got the most cards in the last spring tour. In fact, we got 5 cards, which was more than all the Northern Hemisphere teams combined. Is there something about our discipline that we actually need to address?
Yeah, and I think that's why I mentioned it before, is it does seem to be an issue. And I know my first reaction as a Wallabies fan is I see it happening and I'm like, oh, they're out to get us. They can't, stop us any other way. And I want to blame either the ref or, some law book that's seemingly out to get Australians. But when I think about it, every red card or yellow card decision, I can at least understand. I don't think there's been that many. The Coram Betty one, they've come out and said, they made a mistake. But even when I look at these cards, I can see the argument for them. I think we've just got to be better, and that's something that we're adjusting and we're learning the hard way. But it's also a pretty good time to be learning it, I think.
Yeah, Ando, what are your thoughts?
Look, I need you to repeat the question because I was reading too many of the comments in the chat.
Are we too? Yeah, I mean, look, there are a couple of interesting comments there, but have we been too ill-disciplined? Because if in 2 years' time we're all complaining at the World Cup about getting red cards, yellow cards, when really we all know what the rules are, we all know that we might be getting targeted, or perhaps Australia already has a bit of a reputation as sort of being a bit, sort of ill-disciplined. Are we our own enemies if in 2 years' time we are getting carded left, right, and centre?
I think so, yeah. And what, in my opinion or my interpretation of what's been going on, is that our players are still learning to adjust to Rennie's system, which has a pretty strong emphasis on high intensity and a lot of pressure on defenses, like every single international team is trying to do within the world. But there seems to be a greater emphasis, and he's come out and spoken about it, on wanting to dominate that tackle area and just be absolute rock hard people in those spaces. And you've got players that are obviously trying to go in for those big hits without malice, but still trying to get that dominance over their opposite number, that are just in those microseconds getting it wrong. That's what we saw with Valentini. That's what we saw with Swinton's hit on the French captain. Swinton's like a couple of times for him. They're just not lowering their height enough. And so I'm pretty confident that these things will be work-ons, but we also need to remember the relative international inexperience of a lot of our players. And so it's inexperience combined with pretty strict mandates, combined with adjusting to what is still a developing style that they're trying to get used to. So I think if we combine those things together, I have hope that over the next 18 months, that will start to fade away.
All right, let's switch over to law changes. Now, I don't want to discuss too many law changes. There is definitely one law change that I'm thinking about this that I think I'd like to see. And this is around making rugby that, flowing, continuous game. And it's the stoppages at the ruck where a halfback decides to make a cup of tea, throw the ball through, almost like tunnel ball, like we used to play at primary school, which is, of course, this caterpillar, which to me is about as hideous as the movie The Human Centipede to watch. You see, 3 or 4 bodies lined up behind each other and a ball goes through. Now, I was sort of looking at, what's the issue here? What's the law? But if you look at actually the laws, the World Rugby laws around rucks, the ball, after the referee calls use it, the ball must be played within 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure many of these halfbacks are taking more than 5 seconds to carefully, delicately get that ball to the back and then kick it. What are your thoughts on this, Rev? Can we get rid of the caterpillar?
I think the use it call needs to be more strictly enforced. There's been very few occasions, like so few, that when it does happen, it gets a YouTube segment, it gets retweeted, to death because it's so rare. That needs to be taken seriously. If they're saying use it, then they're the ref, they're in charge of the game. That's an instruction that needs to be followed immediately. I think it's now getting to the point. The Saracens 2 weeks ago, I think, exploited it. So the caterpillar, they formed the 2 bodies and then shifted off to the side of the ruck to stop a player from getting access to the ball. So it acts as an extra layer of defense.
Yeah.
That's a really dangerous thing because technically that's allowed. They really need to, get this sorted because, these laws are sort of made to be broken or at least, pushed right to the limit. That's, what makes players like Richie McCaw so great. They were able to, get away with a lot by pushing the envelope. I think right now we need to determine the caterpillar. I actually don't mind. If it's a smart way to stop a charge down, great, good on them. But if someone's calling use it, get it out of there. Like the ref, as demonstrated by Luke Pearce on the weekend, they're in charge. If they don't like the way things are going, then they act on it. Let's actually be strict with it. Let's enforce it.
Nelson Dale has probably a contentious law change for one, which I think people would love to consider, which All Black tries are worth 3 points. I think we might need to consider that if we want to get a Bledisloe Cup win. But I think, Ando, what are your thoughts on some of the laws? There have been a couple of other ones, I suppose. There was the new the variation on the try being held up and a team having to then kick from the goal line. Is there anything else that you think has worked this year, or things that perhaps they should be considering 2 years out from a World Cup?
I like the equivalent of the 40-20. So what is it? The 50-22, 22-50,
yes.
Which is just a very awkward name. But either way, I'd really like that because it's just provided that extra level. We haven't seen too many teams use it often, but it does have the opportunity or the capacity to really turn a moment in the game in favor of the team that was defending at that moment. So
all of a sudden, kicks become exciting because they become attacking rather than just a kickback, a game of
exactly.
kickback.
Exactly. And it just shows that there's an extra level to what kicking can be within rugby union rather than the attacks of we just throw up bombs all the time and it's just incredibly like aerial ping pong.
Yep. Look, that's it for this segment because we're running into the next one. But yeah, interesting. We'll see what 2022 brings.
All right. Thank you so much. So in this section, it's going to be myself. It's going to be Matt as well. Rev, you're gone, mate. You're cut. And Mitch is back into the show. So Mitch, welcome, mate.
Yes. Let's go. Let's do this.
He's back. All right, cool. So let's get things going. There was some pretty hot news that came out today by Georgina Robertson in the Sydney Morning Herald with a pretty spicy take about Director of Rugby for Rugby Australia, Scott Johnson, has been axed from his $550,000 a year job. And his role, we're not exactly sure what the role is going to be turned into or whether someone else will step into that. But Mitch, I just want to start with you. Scott Johnson, Director of Rugby. What do you think he actually did?
That's part of the biggest issue that I think Rugby Australia's had for the last few years is his role was created primarily to manage Checker in a situation where the coach and the CEO of Rugby Australia didn't see eye to eye and were having quite violent clashes of personality in the boardroom. So they brought in Scott Johnson to sort of manage that situation and sit on the selection panel and hopefully try and create a different opinion of who's selected so it doesn't appear as biased as what people were initially thinking under Checker's reign. And then we got rid of Checker, or Checker stepped down, and we've got a new coach who is best mates from all reports with Scott Johnson, and he's apparently been quite instrumental in bringing in the coaching setup that is around the coaches around Rennie and potentially some of the players. But apart from that, we haven't really seen all that much. And one of his biggest roles is player recruitment and player recruitment and re-signings. Retention, that's the word I'm looking for. And we've had some massive balls up this year in regards to the Samu Karevi, Quade Cooper. Are they playing? Are they not playing? Sort of fiasco around communication. And pretty much it looks like that decision solely sat with Scott Johnson. So at the moment, it doesn't look like a massive gap in terms of responsibility for the future. And hopefully it just means that we've got a little bit more money to spend on other areas.
Well, we've got Tim Foster that's come in saying Johnson was in charge of the halftime oranges on game day. Look, that's a crucial role. Okay, so if that's what he was earning the big bucks for, then
some
fair
very
enough.
expensive oranges.
Only the best. And Sheepy's arguing, bring back a Rev. So not sure what that says about us boys, but we know that
Rev will be back. Don't worry.
He will. And Nelson's saying that too. Nelson, you're cut. All right. We're the favorites here. Now, guys, one of the interesting things is that when you actually look into what Scott Johnson actually did, obviously, like Mitch said, he was brought in realistically to provide a bit of oversight for Michael Checker when his relationship with RA was particularly strained. And I did a bit of digging and talking around with some people in the know within rugby circles. And even amongst them, there's a real lack of clarity about what he was doing as director of rugby at RA. I asked a few people and nobody actually had a clear idea. There was consensus that he is overall responsible for the high performance programs. Now, that includes obviously the Wallabies, the Wallaroos, the 7 squads, the under-20s, like all of it. He is the one at the pinnacle. But when you look into the recent coaching kind of changes and re-signings for the Wallaroos and the Sevens teams, he's had nothing to do with that. He has not been involved in that process in any public way, shape, or form. In addition to that, if you're the person in charge of the Wallaroos program, well, you failed, because the Wallaroos program has been horrific since 2019 and has been incredibly underfunded.
Is there a Wallaroos program?
Yeah, great question. And that is genuinely the question that comes up from it. So as much as I actually agree with his appointment in the first place, and I see the benefit of him coming on board with bringing Rennie and particularly Wisemantle 2 into the setup, and I think those are fantastic additions. And whilst I mean, seeing him on other shows before, he seems like a good guy and knows what he's doing and cares. But the question is, well, what do we actually lose? What do we actually lose? And I think we gain 550,000, but we also lose the opportunity for ref bashing videos from our director of rugby. So that is something to be considering as well. He didn't even get to do one of those. Now, what I'd like to kind of move on from there is to ask the question, well, he's gone. We've got $550,000 spare. Let's just say that his role gets amalgamated into other people's positions. Okay. $500,000. Matt, what are you spending that $500,000 on in 2022?
$500,000 is probably pretty much the average top 10 Wallabies salary. So you're pretty much just throwing that into keeping maybe another player or spreading it between 2 Wallaby top-ups. I mean, in reality, it's not that much money. But for what it seems to be spending, yeah, you're right. Where are we getting value for it? I think kind of for me, the interesting thing, and I think this is a broad question a lot of people around the world in professional rugby have often asked, is what is the role of the director of rugby and how crucial is it? Because, you know, it is this sort of more broader, long-term view, strategic role where you're looking at things like player succession, coaching succession. It's almost like you're working with the governance of the organisation to achieve objectives on the field. And so, you know, that to me is, as has always been many questions I've asked of Rugby Australia in the last decade, is how much thought, how much analysis, how much work and proper assessment and auditing goes into the decisions that Rugby Australia makes. So if they've gotten rid of him, you'd like to think that they'll have real reasons for that, other than we weren't just getting value. Wallabies had a shit season. Let's let him go. That sort of gut feel reaction's not really going to serve us well or inform us on how better to be in the years to come.
And that's where Georgina Robertson's article implied further opportunities and initiatives were going to be taken that's looking at further centralizing and eliminating double up within particular positions. She implied that. It seems like that'll be the path they're going down. Not only does it save money, but actually it helps bring the unions throughout Australia closer together to provide a more direct pathway from the junior programs, hopefully up into the Wallabies. Now, Elijah's put here, use it to bring back Quaid. As much as I've loved Quaid's contributions, if that money was to bring back Quaid, I'd be pretty unhappy, because I think that there are much better uses than
unless
spending
he's
it on a
signed for the
player.
Tarzan, let's be real.
No, I'd prefer Will Harrison because he's the future. Genuinely, he's the future.
You might get Karevi before you bring back Quaid.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
The other point that I wanted to make is surely $550,000 is a Wallaroos tour to Europe. Surely it's Wallaroos tour or a multiple series for them in preparation for the upcoming World Cup. Like, they need game time, they need support and investment. If that money is used for this, then definitely I would be throwing it at that.
Well, Brittany Mitchell wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago, and I think there was a quote there that there was $100,000 hole that prevented them from being able to sort of make certain decisions like that. Now, I don't know if it just came to $100,000, but as I said in a tweet, could we have not flown business class and maybe stayed at a 2 or 3 star hotel and allowed more players to come on board? And my question for people like Justin Harrison of the Players Association is, what's his attitude when players who are part of that association get left behind because other contingent, 30 to 40, get to fly business class? Would it be put to the group, say, hey guys, maybe we need to review things so we can allow for more people to get game time? And I just don't know if people are considering that.
I wonder
Matt,
even
are you volunteering to tell Taniela Tupou that he has to sit in a economy class seat for 14 hours?
You know what? If it means that I say to him, mate, you do that, and 2 other people get to fly to Europe, or at least 1 other person. No, I reckon he's a nice enough guy. I imagine he would be happy to make that sacrifice. Might have to get him some food on the arrival, and plump some,
pack him a few things as well.
plump a few pillows around him.
All right, team. Well, on that note, and I hear he likes a bit of KFC. I think I remember an interview with him saying that he loves some KFC. So what we're going to do now is that is the finish of our section. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Been an absolute pleasure having you on board. So now we're heading for Rev, Nelson, and Mitch. So Matt, you and I are cut, and the other guys come on. So let's.
Alrighty, we're in the dream team. Let's get to it. We're going to finish and wrap it up with probably one of the nicest things to talk about, a bit of a pressure reliever, I think. Just the highlights of 2021. There's no finances involved, no boardroom drama, no law changes. What just made us happy throughout the year? And I'll start things off just by getting mine off the back, because I know two guys south of the border won't be taking it. But I mean, for me, Super Rugby AU was a massive win, but in particular, how was the rivalry between the Reds and Brumbies? Just those 3 games. I think all up the Reds led for about 15 minutes, if that, across all 3 of them. But I mean, the Reds and Nick Berry just did an awesome job of making some unreal contests. And I think for me, a real sense of pride and competition between Australian sides. I know that all the sides were competitive. All the teams look quite good on their best day, but for me, just the Reds and Brumbies competition has made me so keen for Super Rugby 2022. Getting the Pacific element in there, just because we've got something that's really exciting. And for me, there were so many great test matches, but just nothing beat the elation of winning that final. What about for you guys? Now, so what made you happy? What was your highlight of 2021?
Oh, look, before I jump into my highlight, I will echo that rivalry between the Brumbies and Reds. It was something that really built a lot of passion for rugby fans. And I mean, as a Waratahs supporter, I absolutely loved those games, and I'd happily sit there and watch a few more throughout the year. And I think if we had a Super Rugby AU season to kick things off, like we have had in recent years, I think that's been pretty perfect for those rivalries. But look, for me, I think it's hard to pick. There's been lots of good things, Stan, everything like that. But I think for me, a step in the right direction was that French series. And that's probably going to be the highlight for me, seeing some of these young players come in. Our team's changed so much from that French series. But we just had the evolution of players. I think like Lolosio, he can show that he can hack it at the international level. We pushed him too hard throughout the rest of the year against New Zealand and things like that. But we found this mojo where we can actually finish a game out and win a close game. And that's not something we've had for the last few years. I mean, we had 3 draws last year in matches that we should have won. And I think maybe in the back end of this sort of tour, we showed that we're not there yet. We haven't won all those tight games, but we've shown that we can fight right to the very end. And I think it's a building of belief in the players and a building of that culture. So that French series win, yes, they were a little bit weakened. We were a little bit weakened. But, I mean, that was a good French side. And all of those players just went on to beat the All Blacks. So I'll take that as a pretty good win.
Yeah, that was a massive series. And one thing to highlight, because we've got some great comments coming through as well. Simon Strong's come in just to mention that one of the highlights is an all-Melbourne-born Wallaby back row on tour. So that last match with Leota, Samu and Valentini, just getting all the Burn boys in. A really nice touch. And also, Ollie Hoskins, what a story for him. Please take the time, go and listen to Gold Digger Rugby. He just did an interview with Ollie Hoskins, and it is unreal to get that insight. Now, Mitch, I want to throw to you to get your highlight of the year, but one of the highlights I got to say just before we get to that is how nice it is seeing every time we do a live show, your mum and brother are always in here, always commenting. I mean, Nelson and I have siblings that we podcast with, and they're not on here commenting. So great work from Robski and Tim to be on here each time. But Mitch, what was one of the highlights for you this year?
Yeah, I don't think we can talk about 2021 and go past those two performances against the Springboks. We saw a trajectory of the year for the Wallabies. We started off in a really high spot, beating the French in the 3-test series and really finding a way to win at the end there. We went into a pretty grueling rugby champs first few weeks and rugby Bledisloe against a fairly on-fire New Zealand team that was asking and bringing us all back down to reality a little bit after that French series win. And then we go up against the Springboks, where we had massive question marks around some of the players. Bringing Quade Cooper back, was this the right decision? And then we put in two pretty strong and dominant. The second one was dominant, but two very strong performances, the best performances we've seen from this Wallabies team this year. And all of a sudden, we retain we get the Rayburn Shield, we retain it, and then we go on a 5-game winning streak from then on. So the middle of the year was a massive highlight. There was still some questions asked around the spring tour, but COVID, we need to take that with a grain of salt. With COVID, players not available, Marika Korobetti not on tour, Samu Krevi, Quade Cooper not over there either. So if we have some of those players available, like we did in the Springboks games, I think we're looking at completely different results. But similar to what Nelson was saying, I just think we're starting to now see the trend of Rennie's team and the team he wants to build, and the belief starting to get back into these players, and just the positivity in the community around the Wallabies, around the game. Stan's bringing the positivity, speaking it up. We've got so much more insight into the broadcast. Pretty much just going to say all of 2021 has been a pretty good highlight so far.
Yeah. And I think that's really summed up nicely by Sheepy's post as well, just saying the highlight is the positivity in rugby. And Mitch, you mentioned that I haven't seen a buzz as big as leaving Suncorp after that Reds win. And that wasn't just from Reds fans. It was just the real excitement of that was a competition where everyone, was right in it, right to the end. The games were exciting. They were at a really easy time zone to get into. And you knew every play because it was all Australian. So that made a massive difference. And just, I guess, to tie this up, because we've talked about sort of the general highlights, but I want to look at, I guess, who were the players that brought the most joy. I will make it a little harder. I don't want us to use Hooper, Karevi just because they made those World 15s, or Corin Betty because they're listed all the time. Out of the guys that are sort of making their way and perhaps not as experienced, who really made 2021, our year of the Lord? Nelson, who was it for you?
Am I picking a Wallaby or just someone outside the Wallabies? Do you have a preference?
I reckon keep it Australian for this one.
Okay. So it was going to be Aussie, don't worry. Won't talk about Kiwis or anything. But I think in terms of the Wallabies, one player that I was torn about a little bit early was definitely, I've loved Rob Valentini since his time in the NRC, and I really just wanted to see him grow, and I think he's had a lot of promise in the last few years, and I didn't see him being the number 8. If I'm brutally honest, I thought Harry Wilson was that man, and that evolution I think Valentini has shown throughout this year for me is just absolutely exciting, and it's a battle for me because I think they've both got to be in that squad and they've both got to be playing, and I think that's where our best back row is going to be with Hooper in there as well, and whether one's on the bench or we can somehow make our lineouts work with both of them on the field. But Valentini has just shown this promise that I've been wanting to see for the last 3-4 years. His physicality, his ball running. Boy, does he have really attractive hairstyle as well. I mean, you can just put that guy on a poster. So for me, I think he's been one of the big highlights.
I'll get to you, Mitch, but Elijah's come in with something that surely is making Ando scream like a schoolgirl in the
Oh, you should hear him. You should hear him in the background. Oh, he's going off.
For those that aren't watching, Elijah's mentioned Ryan Lonergan from halfway. What a penalty kick to win it. What a massive set of cojones he's got to do that as a young guy coming through to clinch a win. Awesome kick. And yeah, that will go down, I think, in Brumbies history, and probably when he does eventually make his Wallabies debut, expect that to be the first clip of the highlights package. But Mitch, which player stood out for you? Who was your highlight for 2021?
I don't think we can talk about a highlight. I want to say Taniela Tupou because he's just my favorite player, and he's just I just love watching him do whatever he does. I was watching his TikTok live stream the other day for about an hour and a half, just watching him ramble on. He's just a magnificent human. But in terms of performance on the field, we can't go past Andrew Kellaway. He's been an absolute revelation in 2021. He's come in and he seems like a player who's played about 50 test caps, and he's got 10, 12, 15. He made his test debut this year and he just has not looked out of place. He's played wing, he's played fullback, and he looks as comfortable in all those positions.
Look, I think that's an absolute smart call. And I'm going to finish this very quickly by saying I'm not going to buck the trend. I was going to say a certain outside centre who I love, but my highlight, Rob Leota. I think I was his biggest doubter, or close to, and he had a very good end of year tour. So all credit to him. He's really shown what a damaging option he can be. And even if he's not used again, even if Harry Wilson does usurp, I've got to eat my words and congratulate him on a very good end of year tour, I think. So look, let's leave that segment on the shock reveal there, and let's get the others back in. Let's get Ando and Matt in just to wrap this thing up.
I am gobsmacked.
Rob Leota.
Rob
Leota.
You've mispronounced Wilson there.
Yeah.
That shows some personal growth right there.
I'm proud of you.
I'm going to re-listen to this and just slap myself. Like, what was I thinking? What was?
We've recorded this. This has gone out live.
It's
never
going out.
This down. Yeah.
I'll have to humbly.
Rugby Pastor have already started penning the article with the headline, Mitch.
Well, you were totally right in that when this comment came up, I was just going, yes, my little heart just swelled with joy thinking about Ryan Lonergan's clutch kicks. Sheepy's also jumped in and just talked up Noah Lolosiu. So I agree. He did deserve more matches. He had a pretty hard time up against the Kiwis. Some reports coming in from the camp said that he took those losses pretty hard and his performance is pretty hard. So it may well have been that he needed the time out of the 23 just to give him an opportunity to kind of gain a bit of confidence back. But who knows what the alternative would have been if he'd actually been given a kind of game time ahead of Quade Cooper as it was. So who knows? But either way, he had a fantastic season and I'm looking forward to seeing him continue to develop this year. But we're not at the end, but we're reaching the end of the Christmas Rumble. And there's so many things that we could have spoken about, but really, we just need to talk about two things. Number one, how good is Harry Wilson? We all know that. Rev, you were really strong before talking up Rob Leota, so well done. I just thought I'd speak the name of Harry Wilson over you to bring a bit of strength and life back into your body. And beyond that, let's go, Nelson. You're the draft rugby guy, mate. Who's your first Australian draft pick?
Boys, this is going to be surprising that he's not a Waratahs player. Maybe not so surprising because we don't tend to win rugby matches. But for me, it's going to be Tate McDermott. The guy is just an absolute freak of nature. That bloke is awesome.
All right.
I'm shocked.
Left field?
Yeah. I mean, only because I think we must have done a body swap because I'm going to say a Waratahs player. Surely number one Aussie draft pick. Angus Bell.
Nawasi? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Angus Bell.
I thought you were going to say Nawasi there, mate.
Close second. Very close second.
You see that he did his ankle in training?
Mark or Bell?
Marky Mark. Nawasi did his ankle in training. Not too bad, supposedly. I just want to also point out that I get the central position on this page. So if I kind of lean down over here, I do have the body of John Cena.
His ankle's recovering because Craig Balumba was there on the sideline with a lot of ice.
The weight of the world's expectations upon it. So, guys, there's a couple of things I did just want to talk about. I mean, kind of Robski Foster, thanks, Robski, has said some of what I wanted to jump onto. And Sheepy has spoken to it as well. I think genuinely there's this vibe, this marbo within Australian rugby that's speaking to kind of this positivity and this opportunity for what could be and how we could be growing and developing moving forward. And just from my role within Pick and Drive, I just want to say thanks to all of you guys. So Draft Rugby, for Gold Digger, and for Rugby Fixation. We also have the guys, the Rugby Wrap over in Perth or WA, that are doing their gig as well. There's just some really good quality, in a way, community rugby podcasts that are just trying to bring this positivity and dispel the negative narrative that has surrounded rugby for so long. So for you guys, big round of applause. And look, I guess one of the fun questions I haven't actually prepared for you, so I'll say the question to begin with and then stall for a moment, is what are you hoping to be doing with your podcast moving forward into 2022? Because there's a fair few things coming up in the horizon. There's a lot to be preparing for. The Wallaby squad needs to get settled within 2022 before the World Cup. What do you need to settle down before you hit that really crunch period of the World Cup? So Nelson, let's throw it across to you, then Matt, then Rev.
Yeah, look, I think for us, it's just an evolution. Every year we're just sort of building on that platform that we've built. We're in the midst at the moment of talking to a new stat provider, which will give us a far more detailed stats, which is something that we probably haven't seen in rugby, I think, for fantasy footy. So there's some really exciting things on our side that we're hoping to bring in. So the start of the year is going to look for us something along the lines of doing an Aussie rugby side podcast, and then we'll follow that with a Kiwi podcast and then the new teams. And we're going to have a few guests related to the teams on there so they can tell us some of the new guys coming through. And players to look out for. And then we've got our Hot Shit podcast, which is talking about all the new exciting young players that can break out into the year. And for me, these are the podcasts I really love doing early on in the year because it is creating a buzz and excitement for us. And we're deep diving into some of these young players who maybe people don't know yet, and building some of that excitement. So some of these guys we've seen, come out in the last year or two, we were talking about 3 years ago, and maybe hadn't broken into the scene yet, but they come out and we feel like we've known them for years. So for me, I really love that part, and that's the thing I'm looking forward to early next year.
That's incredibly exciting, mate. Can't wait for the Hot Shit podcast, particularly. I just love that hope. I love the hope that comes with just hyping up people based on little evidence, and then just seeing what actually comes up. So, Rev, just quickly, mate, what's your call for Marky Mark? What's the bet that you've got going with Craig, who's the big Western Force fan?
If Marky Mark is a Wallaby fullback specifically, by 2023, I've got to go down to Sydney and buy him a beer, and vice versa. If he's not, I get one. So pretty simple, low stakes, but more than happy to follow that one up, because I think, if he does it, I'm more than happy to go down and say good day, because Craig's been very vocal about it for a good year or so.
Good on him. Just set your bets early and just ride that all the way in. Matt, what's new? What's happening with you in the coming months and 2022?
Well, look, I'm hoping to have a film that will come out in 2022. I was hoping to have an announcement before Christmas. I may still get an announcement. I've got a couple of developments, but unfortunately, the nature of film distribution, as I told you guys before, it does take a little while for things to get confirmed. But look, the film's going to have to come out, because otherwise it'll just be too long in the tooth. As far as the podcast is concerned, I haven't really I'm not sure. I've got a couple of other episodes I'm putting together, which kind of get to a bit more of the heart of what I want to tell people, and also what aligns with what the film promotes. And then after that, I think I'm just going to maybe just continue doing what I'm doing, trying to interview as many people I can, try and take the long view. I'll be very interested in what Rugby Australia do, if they do try to, align themselves, centralize, devolve the member unions of power and change the game. And that's going to be massive, really massive. So I think that's kind of what I'll try and continue to do in the new year, and just bounce off the other work that everyone else is doing, because I think, as you said, the volunteer movement in rugby is important, and I think that's what we're seeing through all these different podcasts, not just us, but all the other guys and girls that are out there, is that it's the heart, the beating heart of the rugby community, as far as I'm concerned.
I think what you've spoken to there about the upcoming power struggle between what's essentially a federated and state model, or the federated and state powers, is incredibly, incredibly important, and it's going to be the big overarching narrative within Australian rugby for the next couple of years, particularly if the axing of Scott Johnson is a sign of what is to come. Rev, 2022, hopefully you're still hanging around with us on Pick and Drive Rugby, but let's talk specifically about Rugby Fixation, mate.
I think one of the things from 2021 that I liked the most was getting to chat to Harry Wilson, my favourite, but even James Marshall, Ben O'Keefe players and referees and people that are just experts in the field. Like that was such a nice thing to be able to do. Getting some of those interviews with people and players that have that insight that I could never have is awesome. So some more of that would be good. But one thing that I'm sort of toying with and would love to try and plan out is meetups and sort of a physical thing. Whether it ends up being a live podcast where people can sort of interact with it, whether it just happens to be going to a game at Suncorp, letting people know through Rugby Fixation and sort of getting a group together to watch it or go to a bar afterwards or beforehand. I think COVID sort of put a lot of stops to that sort of interaction and meeting up with people, but there's such a great fan base of rugby people and I guess guys that want to talk about the game as much as we do. So I think the more that can happen in a sort of physical and in-person nature, the better. So that's something that I'd be pretty keen to look into and get going.
That's bloody exciting, mate. And enjoy your beer, says Sheep. He thinks you've got a pretty good run on that one. Okay, Mitch, pretty safe. I haven't prepped you for this one, mate. And considering we're the co-hosts, we'll see how this one goes. What do you think we're going to be doing in 2022?
I like what Rev just said about meetups. That's something I've been thinking about too. Yeah. So we want to work a little bit closer with some of the super sides. So the Waratahs particularly want to build some relationship between us and them and try and bridge that gap between the community and the super sides. And hopefully we can do some pick and drive meetups prior to Waratahs games, Wallabies games, wherever we get to. I'm thinking of heading down to Melbourne if that ends up going ahead for the super round. We've also got the Women's World Cup coming up next year, so I'm really keen to sort of dive into that as well, whether that takes its own form of a separate podcast with its own name and its own hosts and things, or just a segment, but really sort of dive into the women's game and really track how the Wallaroos are going and give them the spotlight that they deserve.
Exactly. And I think you've just spoken to the heart of what I'm wanting to try and move towards is a greater emphasis on a women's game in 2022, just because they deserve all the hype that they can possibly get. They're incredible, incredible athletes, incredible servants of the game. So look, on that note, we've also had Carlos come in. Thanks for a fantastic year, lads. Thank you, everybody. This has been a great way to finish things. Have really appreciated your time as the fans and pundits that get involved with all of our pods each week. I know that for Pick and Drive, we'll be taking a little bit of a break now just to kind of spend some time not talking about rugby for a couple of weeks, but we'll be back in pretty soon doing a preview for the upcoming Super Rugby Pacific season. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this evening. Hope you have a wonderful night. We'll catch you later.
Bye. Merry Christmas all.
Merry.